For those of you who don't know me, my name's Sam. I'm a romance author based in the UK, and in this series I am reading books that are meant to help instruct or inspire writers to try to see if the advice that's in them has any merit and if it impacts my creative practice in a positive way. So far, the writing books that I've reviewed on this channel have been writing memoirs. We had Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, On Writing by Stephen King, but today I want to take a look at a writing book that's meant to be a little bit more practical. It's less memoir and more how-to. And that book is called Take Off Your Pants by Libbie Hawker. Now, also unlike the previous two books in this series, I read this book quite a while ago, about 6 months ago in fact. And so instead of doing a challenge to try to put some of this advice into practice, I'm going to instead tell you what it is from this book that I utilize in my writing practice now, 6 months after I first read it. Because I do in fact use some of this even now, and will continue to use it as long as I'm writing. But this book is not perfect, so let's jump into it. Now, like I said, this book is a lot more practical than the other ones that I've read. It's also not very long. It's a very, very thin book, so it's very easy to get through. I think I read this in an afternoon, but it definitely aims to be more of like a framework for you to follow. But first, let's talk about the title. Take Off Your Pants refers to the term pantser, the opposite of which is planner or plotter, depending on the vernacular that you use. So as a writer, you are typically a planner or a pantser, or a plotter or a pantser. Or some people call themselves plantsers if they do a mix of the two. But the idea is that a planner or plotter will outline everything before they start writing, whereas a pantser will just start writing. It's pure discovery writing. It's interesting because historically I am quite a planner. For my first two books, I tried outlining them as extensively as possible before writing them. The same was true for my dissertation. I basically start with an outline and I continue to flesh it out until it's prose. And if I'm being honest, whilst yes, that has resulted in published novels for me, I don't recommend that approach. At least for me, it didn't really work that well. And while the output was there, with all of those projects, I really struggled once I got past the fully formed outline phase to go the next mile of turning that into prose. And that's because for me, writing is as much about fitting all the pieces of the puzzle together as it is about actually putting the words together. So when you do an outline that's so comprehensive that you've got every single detail accounted for, you've already put the puzzle together and there's less creative incentive to keep going and finish turning that outline and turning that structure into prose. And by saying take off your pants, what Libbie Hawker is saying is stop pantsing it. She's basically saying her thesis of this book is there are ways to outline things so that you can write quickly and efficiently, and you should be doing that instead of pantsing it, which is an interesting thesis. And I think for someone who wants to create a high output of work, wants to be able to write multiple books a year, is writing something on the more commercial end possibly, then this does work pretty well. And as I see content from a lot of commercial authors, especially a lot of self-published authors who are putting out an ungodly number of books every year, they do tend to be heavier on the plotting side of things. However, if you have tried plotting and you don't think that it's for you, and you prefer pantsing or discovery writing, which is actually a camp that I fall into nowadays, I don't think that this book is going to convince you to stop doing that. I don't think it's going to turn you into a plotter. But let's take a look at some of the arguments she puts forward to help with that. Her main piece of evidence that she puts forward is that she wrote a book in just 3 weeks, in good enough shape to give straight to her editor because she had a solid outline. And the rest of the book aims to set forth a structure for that outline that makes that possible and enjoyable. And she claims that you don't have to give up discovery writing in order to use this outline structure. I kind of disagree with that. But let's take a look at what she recommends and why I don't think it's as useful. So she starts by talking about what she calls the three-legged outline, which consists of character arc, theme, and pacing. She makes a point of showing that plot is missing from those 3 legs and that that's intentional so that you can still have that discovery writing experience. But when we come to pacing, you'll see why that's maybe not as true as she wants to make it seem. So from the 3-legged outline, which isn't actually an outline, it's just 3 elements that are going to inform the outline. Or I guess she's saying they're like legs that are supporting the outline and the outline itself is the stool. I don't know. It's a weird metaphor and I don't quite get it. But the actual outline goes like this. Number 1, main character. Number 2, blank. Number 3, blank. Number 4, blank. And number 5, blank. And then after all those 5 points, you want to put the flaw of your main character. So she gives the example of a Pocahontas retelling that she was writing where she says, main character, Pocahontas, a native girl of the Powhatan tribe living in 1607. Blank, 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 blank. Flaw, too driven by ambition. She steps on others in her attempts to attain glory. So first we're looking at the character arc portion of that 3-legged outline. And to do this, we're filling in number 5, which is the end. And what we're doing here is we're showing what is the character state at the end of the book. And her example is, has given up on all ambitions, sacrificing for her people, ambiguous. Ambiguous meaning it's not explicitly a happy ending, but it's also not explicitly a tragic ending. For point number 2 in the outline, on the character arc side, we want to put the external goal at the beginning of the story. So what is the character's thing that they're pursuing knowingly? And for her example, this is to become a female chieftain and rule over her own tribe. So as you can see here, that point number 2 really aligns with the point number 1, the information that you have about the main character, and it contrasts with the end. So it seems at this point like points 3 through 5 are going to help us understand how the character is going to get from that beginning state to that end state. The next thing she has us look at is the antagonist, and she encourages us to look past a traditional definition of an antagonist and say, who is the character that actually threatens the main character's ability to achieve their external goal? So not necessarily the person that's doing bad things, but who is the person in competition with them for that external goal? So in her example, the antagonist is actually the tribe leaders. First her father, Powhatan, and later in the story, her uncle. Next, we're going to put in the ally, but this doesn't go in number 4. This actually goes at the end after the flaw. And the ally is who is really going to help guide and shepherd and inspire them through that transformation. So in her example, that is Matachana, Pocahontas's beloved half-sister. Then we come to the concept of theme. And again, not going in number 4. This is going right there at the end. And I want to pause here because she does have a lot of things to say about theme, and I think that the notion that every novel should have a theme can feel a little bit like didactic sometimes. And yes, you do occasionally see books that have such a strong theme that it becomes a little bit cloying and like it's beating you over the head with it. However, I actually really have appreciated over the months since I first read this book the concept of having a theme for my books, because I think especially when you're writing a genre like romance, and I imagine this is true for other like genre-based commercial fiction, that the temptation to not bother with a theme is like really high, because it's like, well, I'm writing a romance, the theme is love or the theme is romance, but theme is not genre. And I think this theme, which is sort of this thesis statement of your work, is really useful to serve as a North Star while you're writing. And this is one of the first big takeaways that has stuck with me from this book, and that is to do the work of defining a theme for your book. So the theme in her example is exploring 3 different ways people might respond to a cultural clash. So that is very clearly not looking at the character arc that she's been establishing before, but looking at what does she want to achieve. But the point is that it's very focused on like the author's intention rather than on what's happening in the story, though it does serve as a guide for the story. And the reason that I find this so useful is because every decision that you then make about character arc, about plot, should be pointing towards that North Star. Your conflict should be related to that theme. Your resolution should be achieving the communication of that theme. Your characters should be people that contribute to achieving that theme or who feel the conflict of that theme. So for example, for my second book, The Summer Wedding in Santorini, which is coming out in March, it's a sequel to The Summer House in Santorini. I didn't establish a theme when I was writing it because I hadn't read this book yet, but retroactively applying a theme to it, it would loosely be the right person for you won't make you choose between things that make you who you are. And every piece of conflict and every character moment is in service of that theme. I also think that it's really intentional that theme comes after deciding on that initial character arc, sort of what is that current state and what is the end state that you want to achieve. I don't necessarily think that your antagonist and your ally should be decided before you decide on your theme. I think that my preferred order, if I were doing this outline format, which to be transparent, I don't use this outline format, would be main character, flaw, then maybe end, although we'll come to that in a minute, and then the theme, and possibly the theme and the end could be switched. Because I think your antagonist, your ally, and even your external goal should be informed by what it is that you're trying to achieve with the book. And I think that that North Star is really helpful when making those decisions. The way that I would define the antagonist in Summer Wedding is very different when I apply that theme to what it was when I was first writing that book and making decisions about what the conflict would look like. Now here's where I get really annoyed with this structure, because line 4 isn't actually a singular item. In her example, she puts see below, like literally for see below. And see below refers to an entire outline of your plot. So having it as the number 4 makes absolutely zero sense to me, but I guess it's to organize it so that it's like, okay, here's the character, here's what they want to achieve, here's the person getting in their way, here are all of the plot points that lead them then to the end. So I get it in terms of how it's structuring, but then we go into the plot section of this book. And the plot structure that she wants you to follow is opening scene, inciting event, character realizes external goal, display of flaw, drive for goal, antagonist revealed, thwart number 1, revisiting flaw, new drive for goal, antagonist attacks, thwart number 2, changed goal, ally attacks, girding the loins, battle, death, and outcome, which is quite extensive. I'll let you reflect on this yourself. As I've reflected on this outline, I don't think it's a bad outline, but I think that following this outline definitely undermines her assertion that you can do all of this without taking away that discovery writing piece. And this is where we're going to talk about the end, because I actually think even the end, identifying that right at the beginning of your process, takes away from that discovery writing magic. I think it's nice to have an idea of where you want your character to be at the end, but to be as explicit as she's given up all of her ambitions and she's just absolutely done sacrificing for her people, that is too specific for me. Because of my experience feeling creatively thwarted by my outlining processes previously, in the projects I'm working on now, Project Gilbert, I am very much enjoying the discovery writing approach. And it might be a little bit of an overcompensation from the books that I wrote previously, but it's working for me at the moment. And I have an idea in my mind of what I want that character arc to look like, and even what some of the steps along the way need to be to help drive that. And certainly, of course, I've got ideas about what the plot is going to look like. But for me, that's as far as I want to go with it. If you want to plot out your story, I think that this is a great outline for you to use. But if you don't, or if you're worried like me that it's going to take away the creative impetus to keep pushing and keep seeing what's going to happen next, then I would encourage you to skip this step and to keep the ending that you put in number 5 far more ambiguous than what she has. Keep it really focused on the character arc and what you want the end state for that character to be. And that shouldn't give you any spoilers to the plot. So for example, if I were doing it for Summer Wedding, I would say that the end is that she's honoring all parts of herself in a way that feels exciting and right for her. That doesn't tell you what the happy ending is, but for me as the author, I know that that's what I need to aim for. And any resolution that doesn't completely fulfill that is not a resolution at all for that book. So this is going to be entirely up to personal preference, but I'll leave it to you to decide if you want to go into that much detail. You could go into a bunch of detail for the very beginning and then just use this as a framework for when you're actually writing instead of outlining. That's not a bad idea. I might even try that for Project Gilbert book 2. And then that is your outline, which is a lot. It's very complicated, but that's what she recommends. But now let's talk about the other thing from this book that has really stuck with me and that I try to put into practice, and that is her concepts around pacing. She's got a chapter in here called Triangles All the Way Down. She attributes the idea originally to John Truby, but she goes on to explain it in a way that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's basically that in order for a book to have good pacing, you need to think about it in terms of pinch points. So at the very beginning of the story, everything is wide open for your character, everything is normal, and then you're funneling them down through external and internal circumstances and happenings to a pinch point where something happens, they have to make a decision, they have to do something, and that's the first step towards their character arc. That's the inciting incident, the call to action, whatever you want to call it. But the rest of the story is the same thing. After each pinch point, things open back up again, and then you drive to the next pinch point. And then they open back up again, and you drive to the next pinch point. And no matter how long your book is, no matter how many of these triangles there are, if you keep funneling things in that way, and it's clear that you're funneling in a consistent direction, which you're able to do because you've identified your character arc already, that creates good pacing. And I love this approach, and I think that this is really helpful for me when I'm writing. I do have to fight the urge to over-plan this, and I've got a couple of writing vlogs that you can go back and watch where it's clear that I'm like overdoing it on the triangles. But it's really helpful for me to think when I'm writing, what is the pinch point that I'm funneling towards at the moment? And your writing will even look different depending on where you are in that pinch point. It'll reflect how close and immediate and important and urgent that moment feels. So when it's wide open, you might be really descriptive and explore quite a bit with your language. Whereas then as you start to get closer to the pinch point, you're going to be a lot more concise and you're going to be really focused on the here and now, the bodily sensations, make sure you're bringing your reader into that sense of closeness with you. And between your language and your plot points that are doing that funneling as well, the reader will start to feel that sense of pacing of here we go again, here we go again. And it keeps driving the story forward and keeps it really readable as well. And that's basically it. That's the whole book. Like I said, it's not very long. She talks about all of these principles in a really concise way. I would say definitely get this on ebook if it makes sense price-wise, because I paid for the paperback and it is teeny tiny and there is no visual benefit to having the paperback. And then you might be able to really easily highlight bits that you want to come back to. Like I said, I don't think that this book is going to turn full-on pantsers into plotters. But if you're a bit of a plantser, or if you've been a pantser but you are realizing that maybe pure discovery writing isn't doing what you wanted it to do, then maybe this will help give you a little bit of a framework, even if you don't want to do it all as an outline, at least to reference while you're writing, to help give you that structure that you want. I think that so often outlining methods can feel like you're laying pipe work, trying to funnel the story through exactly, whereas I think that a good outlining framework is more like a trellis where your story can really grow organically over it. And I think that this framework, maybe other than the plot section, is mostly a trellis. I think in the plot bit, it starts to get a little bit like pipe work. Hopefully it's helped you understand what you can expect from the book and maybe given you a little bit of a framework that you can try on your own. Let me know in the comments if you've used this or if you're going to use it. And if you're not already, be sure to hit subscribe because I've got some other writing books coming up and it's all helping inform my creative practice and I hope it will yours as well. So follow along to make sure you don't miss that. Thank you so much and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.